Let's talk about mangoes.
Yeah, let's talk about the current mango season and what's going on. We're here in my backyard right now, and we're surrounded by flowering mango trees at the moment, and they're in lots of different stages. So we got trees like this tree right over here behind us here, which is an Angie mango, and you can see it had an early bloom, and it's got lots of little pea-sized mangoes already, but it also has panicles coming out that still have flowers that are open, and it also has stems that are just starting to push out panicles, new panicles. And the same is the case for a lot of the other trees here right now, and it kind of tells the story of what's going on in terms of the tree's response to the weather that we've had this winter.
Yeah, confusing weather.
Yeah.
It's cold. It's not. It's cold.
Well, that's how it is here in South Florida. I mean, one day it's in the 40s, and then next thing you know, boom, we're back in like almost 80 degrees.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's warm enough right now that I'm sweating outside here, and you know, that wouldn't have been the case 3 weeks ago. So we actually had pretty cool weather in the early part of December, and I guess it was the end of November, and that's actually what's responsible for the fruit that you see on the trees right now. That's from the response to that weather actually, and not the weather that we had in January, because these flowers emerged actually at the beginning of January.
And how cold was it?
And it got into the 50s and 40s, I think, during that time.
High 40s, right?
Yeah, and it was for a solid week, maybe even over a week at the end of November and the beginning of December in 2024. And that was enough to stimulate some of the trees to flower, especially trees like Angie and Pickering, and a few other varieties that flower very easily. They don't need like 2 weeks of cold to get them to go. And you know, early season mangoes oftentimes have older, more mature stems because they finish their crops before the mid and later season stuff. So they're a little more ready to respond to our cold fronts that roll through in November or December than the other varieties are. And so anyway, that's why we're in this situation where we have essentially two crops. So we'll have a spring crop here in South Florida, and we'll have a summer crop, and that's pretty normal actually. It's not unusual for us to have that situation here.
Now, how prevalent do you think powdery mildew is during these cold?
Well, it's out there.
We had like when it was in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, it's certainly out there now. If we were to walk around here, we probably won't see too much of it. Last year it was pretty severe, but powdery mildew definitely does favor cooler weather. We did have a stretch in the week of January 20th where it got pretty wet. It was drizzling and rainy, and powdery mildew doesn't actually germinate well when everything's wet. It's out there.
It washes it off.
It actually does kind of wash it off, and especially if it's a hard grain. But so we're not seeing anywhere near the prevalence of powdery mildew this year that we did last year in South Florida. And that's certainly a good thing for those of you growing mangoes in your yard, whether you applied a product to prevent it or not. But what we have seen is lots of anthracnose, right? So everybody...
and that's prevalent even if it's cold or not then?
Yeah, so anthracnose favors warm temperatures to really thrive and take off, usually. Warm and humid is sort of gasoline on the fire for anthracnose. But there was enough wet weather and an overcast weather such that everything kind of got drenched and was staying saturated with water for days on end and was unable to dry out. And when that happens, you'll still get anthracnose even if it's cold. So
I guess, okay, so anthracnose, powdery mildew, major issue or moderate issue during the first floral stage of mangoes down here?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your location, right? So where we are, you know, Chris is over close to the ocean.
Advantage.
It's an advantage in your.
But there's still powdery mildew.
There's still powdery mildew, and powdery mildew doesn't care as much about humidity the way that anthracnose kind of needs it to really take off and thrive. So where we're located, we can get away with not spraying for anthracnose and still end up with fruit most years, right? But it also kind of depends on what you're growing. But if you're inland and you're over in Loxahatchee, if you're in Homestead, you know, or West Kendall or whatever, you know, out there it's going to come down to what you're growing, because if you're growing, anthracnose resistant varieties like Pickering or Philippine or Duncan or Angie, you might still get good crops from your trees even if you don't spray. But if you're growing more fungal susceptible stuff, like Gary, or whatever, you might not see a lot of fruit during certain years depending on the severity of the anthracnose, because your humidity levels are high enough that it's likely going to occur in some amount, especially if you just get one rain event. It doesn't take a lot of rain to get anthracnose going. When I was in Loxahatchee for like 7 years, I observed that, if it stayed completely dry, okay, and there wasn't any rain, and I kept my weeds down and everything, my humidity wasn't terrible in that situation, then I could get and expect fruit from trees without spraying. But the moment we got one little bit of rain, or even just a little bit too much overcast weather, anthracnose was bound to take off on certain varieties, more prone varieties, if we got that condition. It was just guaranteed to happen.
Now, because of the cold weather, because it started to flower, and the flowers were like at their peak optimal point. They're nice and open, but it was 40 degrees. Mm-hmm. Now, how much does the insect situation, because when it's cold, there's no insects to pollinate these flowers.
Yeah, it matters. I mean, so when we had all that rain, Chris, we didn't see that many pollinators, did you?
No.
I mean, it was like they took a vacation.
They took off.
Yeah, so it was cold and wet, and the pollinators, whether that was bees or flies or wasps or even ants, didn't like that. And so during that period of time for 4 or 5 days, these trees had open flowers ready to pollinate.
Right, that's
and
what I saw.
They couldn't pollinate because the bugs just weren't there to do the pollinating. And mangoes...
That's what usually happens
in
the first flush of flowers.
Yeah.
Is it's too cold, and then...
It happens a lot, yeah. And so, if you're going to try to get that early fruit, we call it spring fruit, right? Because they're usually maturing those mangoes in, April or May or even the early part of June. If you want to ensure that to happen, you really have to have a good disease control regimen. And it certainly helps to be closer to the ocean. So, yeah.
Question?
One thing that I noticed this year more than other years is it seemed like the panicles on certain parts of the trees were affected, but not on other parts.
Yeah.
And in the past, it's been sort of more uniform on each tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we noticed that on the north sides of most of our trees, if there was going to be fungus, that's where it was occurring. Especially in areas where we missed. But that happened with some of our larger trees, like some of our larger Edward trees, for example. They're not getting a lot of indirect sun, because they're just shaded by their neighboring tree. In an orchard situation, this happens. And probably if we were to look through my yard here, we'd find that there's probably greater fruit set on the southern sides of the trees that are receiving more sun exposure. And it's more critical, especially if they're flowering early. Remember, if they're flowering during the month of January, December, that's our lowest level of daylight hours throughout, through the course of the year. And so that's less time for the sun to dry everything out as well. More sunlight usually means more flowers in general,
right.
But it also means, less disease typically, disease opportunity for anthracnose at least. So,
and they love being anthracnose likes humid and everything to be nice.
Humid and warm,
yeah.
But as we saw, it can still occur even when it's cool. So that anthracnose that we got last month was occurring when the weather was relatively cool. So now one thing we need to talk about with anthracnose is that there are more aggressive strains of anthracnose now in Florida than there were 10, 15 years ago.
I agree.
And I remember having...
Especially where I'm at.
Yeah. So it's exacerbated to be in a more humid situation, but now with these more aggressive strains of anthracnose, you might even be applying product and it's not enough to prevent it from occurring if your humidity is high enough. So, and I remember talking to Randy Pletz, who used to be at the University of Florida. You've met Randy.
Yeah.
He talked about some of these new strains of Geosporides, which is anthracnose, and how much more difficult to control they were if the conditions were.
It's not going to take copper's not going to cut it.
Yeah, I mean, leaning on copper alone isn't really a great recipe for trying to control some of these newer strains
especially
of anthracnose.
for soursop, for example.
Soursop is
way more susceptible to anthracnose.
Yeah.
I would have to. I switch over to like products like Pageant and Empress for soursop because copper's not cutting it.
Yeah, you need to at least. I mean, I think there's still a role to play for copper, but I think copper really needs to be rotated. And I mean, optimally, you're rotating like more than 2 products. And unfortunately, a lot of times when I go on the internet and somebody posts a picture of a tree that's having an issue, perhaps with disease and perhaps not with disease, but they're having some issue with their fruit production process, whether it's flowers or fruit development. And one of the knee-jerk responses I'll always see from other people trying to help other people is spray it with copper, spray it with copper, spray it with copper. And I think we've kind of abused copper a little bit in the tropical fruit world in our attempts to control fungus by kind of using it as a catch-all instead of using it as something that's part of a process of rotation. And so some of these copper products that they sell at big box stores have very low amounts of copper in them relative, in the terms of their metallic copper equivalent numbers. So this is becoming more and more of an issue as we get more aggressive strains of fungus and people are planting mango trees and things like soursop way out west, right? In like these areas where they have more yard space to do it, because over here the yards have been shrinking.
Right. So, instead of keeping all the farms here close to the ocean.
Yeah.
They made, all the development and all these houses.
Well, I mean, they got to go where land is.
Right.
This is like everybody wants to live
closer to the water,
closer to the ocean.
Yeah, but the farms should be here, and then all the development out west. This is all the fertile land is here.
Yeah. Well, it's great that there's still some farms around the the more optimal zone. I mean, obviously there's
like a huge number of people that are going to Waxahachie and
the land's
like
cheap.
Lewiston and stuff like that, all around the lake.
Yeah, it's too expensive to buy land around here.
Yeah. Yeah. There are still tracts of land, and if you do have a yard in, the coastal zone, if you will, I certainly encourage you to fill it with fruit trees because you should take advantage of that.
But you guys are in a great place, incredible advantage compared to being in the Redlands and Homestead. Now, your first mango flowers this year were in January, December.
Yeah.
Now, let's say what percentage did those make it to baby?
Not
baby
very
fruit?
not very high, but like from that, in fact, we had bloom coming out in November.
It was overwhelming, the bloom.
Yeah, I mean, the bloom from November, we got a few fruit from it, and it's not much. Now, this bloom that occurred in December and part of January, we're going to have
what we're seeing now.
Yeah, so like, I mentioned how this Angie is about pea size now, but we have some from that same bloom over at the farm in West Palm Beach where the fruit are, more larger than that, like grape size or so at this point. So that fruit's going to start to mature towards the end of April, and we'll get like a few, and then we'll get a lot more in May. And so with mangoes, as soon as the fruit is set, you can kind of start counting down the days to maturity. And so with the more rapid maturing varieties, you're looking at a 90-day window or so before you start to find a few ripe fruit. With some, it can be beyond 120 days, so it's a range. And the early season ones tend to mature faster. So if you've got an Edward or a Rosy Gold, for instance, that set a fruit last month in January, then you're going to go February, March, April before you see the first ripe mangoes. Yeah, for the first ones, right? And that crop will last anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. So some of those mangoes from the same bloom are going to take longer to mature depending on their final size and where they occur in the canopy. The ones that have more sun exposure are going to ripen faster than the ones that are, often located within the leaves and everything.
You guys have Glen, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's the earliest you've ever gotten Glen at your farm, Chris?
Sometimes we get like an odd one. It's like not the whole tree,
right.
But, we got something, and It hasn't been crazy. It's not like been
Super
December
early.
or
It's
something
not like it's not
that.
like rosy gold early.
No, it's not for us anyway.
Well, I have a question. I have a friend who's their sister lives in Miami, inland, and their Namdok Mai tree is loaded right now with mangoes that they actually just picked, and I couldn't believe it, and they sent me a video and I saw it.
Well,
Is that like-
Namdok Mai is a special mango though.
Yeah, we've had a Namdok Mai tree that like we trimmed, like left one branch because that one branch just fruits early. The rest of the tree, no.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's like crazy. So it's like, of
Yeah.
course we're gonna, not mess with success there with that one. But yeah,
I
the
mean,
rest
it's a
of-
funny tree though. It's a
Yeah.
funny variety because it flowers more than anything else. It doesn't want to stop flowering when it's supposed to stop flowering, and it's constantly like setting itself back from becoming a tree, especially when you graft and you want it to grow.
Yeah, we've gotten off-season bloom from our Namdok Mai trees before. So I've had like a Namdok Mai fruit in December or January before. They can bloom at odd times.
Yeah.
And in Thailand, in the tropics, Namdok Mai trees are not blooming off of cold weather, they're blooming off of drought stress. And Namdok Mai, obviously there's lots of different kinds of Namdok Mai, but they can bloom off of drought stress if it's severe enough. Now, here in Florida, we don't get a ton of drought stress in our summers because we get a lot of rainfall. And it's, you can go through stretches of time where there's some drought during the summers, but at some point it's going to rain, And that kind of inhibits how much off-season fruit we get from Namdok Mai or bloom, and that goes for other trees too. Some of these other ones with reputations to fruit in the off-season, like Royal Special, also known as Punasa, Chakanon, they're not always so consistent about doing that off-season fruit
But if you
production.
leave them in a pot, I always notice that if you leave like Chakanon in a pot or Namdok Mai in a pot, and you stress them out with lack of water,
Yeah.
they'll flower.
Yeah, that's true. So a potted Namdok Mai or a potted Chakanon is probably
Even
more
lychees.
likely to.
Lychees do a lot better as far as producing flowers in a pot than
Okay.
in the ground sometimes.
I've never tried to grow a lychee in a large container before, but that
Well,
that
you
would
can
make
cut the
sense.
water.
On the Glen, the earliest we've ever harvested Glen that I can recall is, I believe, the mid or later part of April, where like the main crop was, or at least one of its main crops were starting. I don't recall ever harvesting it earlier than that, but I've definitely harvested Glen in April more than one season.
That's a serious
So-
money crop right there.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not as consistent about producing spring fruit as other varieties are. So our most consistent spring mangoes, and Chris probably sees the same thing, is Rosy Gold, Dwarf Hawaiian, Rosa, and Edward. Those four will put out spring fruit every single year.
Yeah, I
can't
remember you talking
recall
about
ever
Edward.
a year where those four mangoes. But there's other varieties that do it on a relatively consistent basis, such as like Gene Ellen. We get fruit. They used to call that early lemony Saigon. That's a mango that fruits in spring for us most years.
Oh,
okay. Well, I found that the first bloom made a lot of male flowers, and that's normal. Dwarf Hawaiian is descended from Julie, which Julie passed that trait on to a lot of varieties, I think.
Susceptible.
They don't like the temperatures when they flower. They'll come out disproportionately male. So all the fruit set from our Dwarf Hawaiians at the moment is mostly on the terminal ends of the panicles, and that's not unusual. Like, I've seen that kind of thing happen before. But typically that second bloom, we get better fruit set. But it depends on how much of the canopy already has fruit.
Right.
Because, even if they have only a few mangoes, like, they may not, like, get real crazy with that second bloom. I'd rather have spring Dwarf Hawaiians.
Oh, yeah. Earlier the better.
That early fruit is so valuable, right,
Yeah.
Chris? In terms of having mangoes when there's no other mangoes around, or very few. But those second Dwarf Hawaiians that come in summer also are a little more prone to disease, I find. They crack open more. You've probably seen that happen, where they get fissures in the skin.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to sell mangoes, especially if you're shipping them, you want that fruit to be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And so I really prefer that Dwarf Hawaiian crop to come overwhelmingly in the spring or the early part of summer, rather than coming in the middle summer or later.
A common question I get is, and you guys could answer this, is if somebody's looking to start a yard, what varieties, from an Anthracnose standpoint, would be some of the better ones to get that deal with it well, in your experience?
Mine does pretty well. That's at least for me. Yeah.
Do they split open on you?
Yes, sometimes. I actually have found that the number 4 splits worse than the Sea of Tong and the Moon. So, but some years, yes. It kind of depends on how long.
On the rain, I think. I blame it on the rain.
I've seen it happen usually when we have long periods of drought, and then all of a sudden we get a deluge.
Yeah, when the skin it gets less flexible with the drought, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're adding all this
an abundance
stuff
of water,
inside,
especially the rainwater is distilled, right?
Well,
and then it penetrates a lot easier into the root system and even through the
it carries a lot. Rainwater carries a lot of stuff from the atmosphere down with it. I think.
Well, I think it's just more of a matter of the differences in in water potential when you go through a drought and all of a sudden you get all this water, and the trees have been kind of starved of water for a long time, and they're just looking to absorb every ounce of it that they can. And some trees are more efficient at using that water than others, and so some varieties don't split when it rains really hard, or don't split as much, right, compared to some of these more oblong-shaped mangoes like Namdok-Mai or something like that. But in terms of anthracnose resistance, some super resistant varieties that I know of are Floragon, Pickering, Angie. I grew these in Loxahatchee successfully even without spraying. Actually, Valencia Pride, believe it or not, old variety, but actually still has very good anthracnose resistance even today. Maha Chinook has outstanding anthracnose resistance. Duncan, Philippine.
Lemon meringue.
Lemon meringue has pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, it can fruit out in Loxahatchee land in Wellington without spraying. Sweet Tart has really good anthracnose resistance. I used to have a lot of them out there in Loxahatchee. And that one is really bulletproof. I mean, like, you almost don't have to spray for anthracnose on that variety, at least to get some fruit. What else is super?
Orange sherbet?
Orange sherbet's reasonably good. I don't think it's as good as lemon meringue's anthracnose resistance. But, certainly you could grow it in that situation. And what else has really good anthracnose resistance? Can you think of? I mean, there's certainly more. It's a longer list than that.
Or some of the worst also. So
the worst?
There's let's finish the good ones, and then maybe say some of the
let's
worst
think of a few more that have really good ones. Yeah. Fairchild has very good anthracnose resistance. Yeah. Fairchild will fruit in humid areas, no problem, and that's the case in Hawaii too. Like in the more wetter parts of Hawaii, Fairchild does pretty well. Sunrise. Sunrise does real well out in humidity and handles anthracnose quite well. And beyond that, I'm just trying to think of. Neelam is a late season mango that
pretty good.
That handles anthracnose quite well. That could fruit without spraying in Loxahatchee.
Orange sherbet seems to do well for me.
I mean, like where we are out by the coast, I don't see anthracnose problems with it. I've gotten reports
over where I'm at. The orange sherbet does pretty good.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's important for people to remember too.
All of them you mentioned.
A lot of the new varieties haven't been tested yet, so a lot of the really new
stuff. There's not a lot of sample size, right?
So
that's an issue. Unfortunately, people don't talk about the results of their varieties enough on the internet, and they are really less likely to talk about them when they don't do well.
Yes.
So, and that's unfortunate because people shouldn't be afraid to talk about poor results because that's information. And I think what happens is people get afraid that people are going to be critical of them or think that they're doing something wrong, and they may not be doing anything wrong. It's just that variety does not thrive in their climate, and that's something people can learn from. But I see that quite a bit where there's varieties we know people are growing, but we have very little information to go off of other than our own experiences, which are limited. Right? We might only have 1 or 2 examples of a variety, and that doesn't tell the whole tale. Like a variety that I've done really well with is Phoenix. I get fruit from Phoenix every year. We have like 5 or 6 or 7 of the trees or something like that, and it performs wonderfully for us. But I know from what I've been told by other people that that's not the case for people in more humid areas with Phoenix. They get quite a bit of fungus on it. Another one we have good success with is Pineapple Pleasure, but I know Pineapple Pleasure struggles for people out west.
Even here, I mean, my neighbor's tree was completely almost lost his whole crop this year.
But for context, we're in Palm Springs, which is only a few miles
towards the end when they start to get ripe. That's when anthracnose really hits it, the pineapple pleasure.
Yeah, it certainly can get post-harvest fungus, but I'm talking about at the floral stage and the small
flower.
fruit
What about
stage.
things like that you struggle with, like lemon zest, but other people don't? Like, how often is it like there are areas that aren't too far apart, but someone's doing okay and someone's not, and it's not that they're doing different stuff.
Yeah,
it's just-
especially with like something like bacterial spot or rots, like those are very hit or miss, and so like we've had a terrible experience with lemon zest. We used to have like 15 lemon zest trees at one point in time, and I top worked all of them or cut them out because they were getting bacterial spots so bad, and that happens to other people too. But then there's a good solid 30% of people who have wonderful success with lemon zest. Their trees don't get infected.
I don't get anything.
Chris, you do pretty well, right?
Well, the lemon zest, I have like 1.5 trees of that.
That's what I have, 1.5 trees.
Yeah, and what I noticed this past season for the, the complete lemon zest tree, the early fruit got affected, and just a couple weeks later, the later fruit, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And you do great with it, right? The lemon
Yeah, I
zest?
do fine. I'll just get one crop off of it, and I have a 20-year-old tree. It probably gives me about 15 to 18 mangoes or something like that.
That's
And-
it? From a 20-year-old tree?
Yeah.
That's
You
not
gotta
good.
I'm about to take out my tree after
That
hearing
sucks.
But no bacteria. I get anthracnose, but no bacterial black spot.
Okay. Valid. So we don't really have too much problem with anthracnose on lemon zest. It is very prone to powdery mildew, however, but we control for that usually. But bacterial spot is awful with lemon zest for us.
And I was expecting to see some.
Right.
And I didn't see any.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious when you get it because it gets all these star-shaped lesions on the fruit that crack open, and then they fall apart on you when they're reaching maturity. They're zombie mangoes, as I call them. Lemon zest is not the only culprit there, by the way. We got rid of our Kent and our Kit trees for that reason, and we top-worked our Palmer mango for that reason, and our Hatcher trees got top-worked for it.
Yeah,
So
Palmer's all around susceptible to everything.
Yeah, I mean, like Palmer's pretty old technology at this point anyway, and it's very, surpassed by more modern varieties.
Even
Some
for
stuff.
eating quality.
Yeah. Oh,
Even with
yeah.
that.
I think it's kind of bland and boring, but there are people that like it. I mean, we get some Puerto Rican customers that ask about it because they grow it a lot in Puerto Rico commercially. So it's not like a dead cultivar, but it's very limited demand. And I ended up grafting one to keep in a pot so I could graft a few here and there.
Right here and there for
just a few,
just in case
not
someone
many.
asks for it.
Yeah, exactly.
But growing Palmer commercially is mind blowing. I can't even fathom growing Palmer commercially.
Palmer is
down
still,
here.
Yeah,
It's so susceptible.
Yeah, and not only that, but there's so many better choices now. But in other countries like Brazil, they still
It's the
grow
cutting
it.
edge mango there.
Yeah, or at least they still grow it commercially there. Like they grow it in Brazil. They do grow it in the southern part of Puerto Rico too, actually. What's it called? Martex Farms, I think, grows Palmers. But that's because they're growing it on vast scale, and if it's grown, in certain conditions, it can yield very well, and it gets good color, and it probably has pretty good shelf life, and they care about all those things before flavor.
Right.
So, but nowadays,
That's why you still got Tommy Atkins.
Right, there's Tommy Atkins is still a very solid block of the commercial import market for mango in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, because it's pretty.
And because it yields well under
Yes.
certain circumstances, and it will produce off-season fruit when it's treated with potassium nitrate.
Oh, really? Just like Longans?
Well, as long as you have to use potassium chlorate to get them the fruit in the off-season, but you can spray Tommy Atkins with potassium nitrate in the tropical latitudes. It does not work here, okay? One of the biggest misconceptions I see with potassium nitrate is that they think it will force mangoes to flower in the off-season or flower at all anywhere, and that's not the case. Tom Davenport actually did really good research on that subject for growing mangoes in Florida and treating them with potassium nitrate back in the early 90s. And it just doesn't work here. All it does is pump them full of nitrogen, but I still see people once in a while talking about, they'll ask me if they can spray potassium nitrate on their trees and get them the fruit. And I just tell them that, if your mangoes flower here, it's due to environmental stress, not because of anything you gave them. So all you're really accomplishing with potassium nitrate is filling them up with nitrogen. But Tommy Atkins has pretty good shelf life. It's not just that it fruits well and that it's pretty, and it stores well. So it has a lot going for it in that perspective. Just from an eating quality standpoint, it's been long surpassed, and it was
Now,
surpassed.
is that
when it
just
came out.
because it's the store-bought ones we know are terrible, but people tell me if it's homegrown and picked at the right time, they taste pretty
They
good.
taste okay.
yeah,
I would.
average
I
at
think.
best,
I think you can
yeah.
exaggerate something like that a little bit. It's fine. It's still way outclassed by almost everything else, but it is not objective. Like, you go buy one of these ones from the store, not only are you getting a mango that's disappointing, it's a mango you might just spit out because not only is it devoid of flavor and very fibrous because they've been treated with a lot of nitrogen. By the way, nitrogen increases the amount of fiber in your mango, by the way. But like, when you cut these things open, a lot of times they're broken down inside because they didn't handle the hot water treatment right, or they were picked too early, or
Yeah,
they got
jelly seed.
chilling injury is one of the most common issues with imported mangoes because they're storing mangoes in the supply chain with fruits that can handle much lower temperatures than a mango fruit can. Mangoes can start getting chilling injury at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, they store apples, home fruits, stone fruits at almost 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's too
So
cold.
that, and a lot
You
of
get
times,
cell damage.
Sure, absolutely. With mangoes, that can happen. So yeah, there's a night and day difference between a Tommy grown in the backyard versus one that's being imported commercially. It's substantial, but I would still never plant one.
Yes.
I have one, okay? At the farm in West Palm Beach, we still have one that produce Tommy trees and budwood because there's a minor amount of demand for it. Very little demand for the fruit, although a few of my employees like them. But otherwise, if I'm growing mangoes in a yard situation, it's way near the bottom of the list of varieties that I would grow, even though it can taste better in a backyard.
What are some of the new promising commercial varieties that you see hitting the market or that are discussed that will be in the future?
So if we're talking about commercial, like imported into the United States, find them at Publix or Costco or whatever, I do know that they're trialing other varieties, but I find that the commercial importers are always like 20 years behind schedule when it comes to this stuff. So they are growing other things. Like they're growing Namdoc maize in Mexico now on considerable scale and some other Latin American countries. Ataulfo's been around for a while, right? So that, is different than the Tommy or the Kent
Mexico's
or the
pride and
Kid.
joy, though.
Right. Well, they're trialing out some of the Australian cultivars, like Calypso and stuff like that, and a few other things
Have
too.
you tried Calypso?
I've tried R2E2, and I've Kensington Pride and Honey Gold, I think, is the other one that I've tried.
I had the Kensington Pride, a tree of that, and it became a top work project.
Yeah, so we still grow Kensington Pride, but we only have one. It's not a special mango. It's not. But
Sorry
to
to all the
Australians,
Australians.
Yeah.
So I get people that reached out to me and asked like if these Australian cultivars are worth growing, and I haven't tried them all, so I can't say for sure. But like most of them appear to be geared towards people that are growing mangoes for commercial export, and when that's the case, flavor is never high on the list. It's usually near the bottom in terms of how they're rating these things. Color, size, packing ability, yield are much bigger considerations, and so I'm skeptical. So Australians that are watching, I apologize if I'm offending you, but I am skeptical of the Australian cultivars.
Well, they go for looks.
One of the things I think about with the Australian cultivars is that we're growing them in the U.S. Conditions are different than in Australia,
and
so it could taste different.
That's absolutely valid. This is a point that gets bantered about quite a bit because differences in terroir and climate can have big impacts on the way a cultivar tastes, for sure. But sometimes even that gets exaggerated. So this happens with certain Indian mangoes, for instance, where people will insist that they taste very different in India, and that is true in certain circumstances.
Alfonso?
And Alfonso is a good example of one that absolutely can taste very different from its homeland. But I've also had Indian mangoes that were grown in India, okay, and they tasted exceptional, but they weren't necessarily like some of the imported Kesars, for example, tasted almost identical to some of the Kesars we were producing here in a very different soil and climate. So it's not always the case that a mango will taste vastly different. Sometimes that is true, and sometimes it's not.
Well,
So-
Alaport Benishan is phenomenal.
Yes, that one is exceptional here.
Phenomenal.
And I don't believe it tastes that much different from what I understand talking to customers from India that have tried that mango in India, where it's
Where's from?
native, and here, and it can depend and it can vary. Of course, if we get a lot of rain here, for example, which they don't always get and usually don't get,
It can get washed
in mango
out.
season, it can have its flavor effect.
Yeah.
But if it's nice and dry, that mango is outstanding.
Places. But it's a large mango. It's like the quality of Zillate, or
on a
better,
very
or like a
good day.
Glen, or much better tasting Glen. But the problem with Davis Hayden is that it splits open all the time.
Yeah, Davis Hayden's really prone to bacterial spot. We used to have 2 Davis Hayden trees, and we top worked both of them. Well, I'll give a few examples of varieties that we've had trouble with, and I've certainly seen struggle with anthracnose. One is called Bizcochuelo from Cuba, from Santiago, Cuba. Very anthracnose prone, one of the most anthracnose prone mangoes we grow. Rosa is pretty anthracnose prone.
I was going to say that.
Rosa's originally from Brazil, but we have it here in South Florida.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most disease-prone mangoes I'm aware of in general. It gets bacterial spot too. How about that?
I think Har was the one who brought that in
from Brazil.
Yeah.
From Brazil.
Oh, okay,
Really?
very possible. Yeah, it's very common throughout Brazil, and they grow it in some of the neighboring countries too, from what I understand. In fact, I think they grow it in Bolivia.
Yeah, he said that the name Rosa was because it was the only mango variety in equatorial Brazil that had color.
Ah,
And so
okay.
The
That's
rose
interesting.
color.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you get them intact, right, they're beautiful. They
Yeah,
get
it's
very lovely color.
And are very early for us.
Yeah.
Usually
And,
we
and
have 2
being
crops.
early with low humidity, they still get anthracnose.
Yeah, absolutely. But I found that I can kind of control the anthracnose on them. But like, if you take that mango inland, forget it. Gary Zill used to have a rosa tree, and he cut it down because it was so disease prone, from what I remember.
Yeah, but he's pretty wet where he is.
Yeah, he's even further west than we are here right now. He's out there in like West Boynton where he lives, and so he gave up on that one, I think. Some other real prone ones to anthracnose.
All import Benishad.
I got it to fruit in Loxahatchee, but
I get it to fruit too, but it's very few that I
Gets
get
a lot of
intact.
post-harvest.
And they get a lot of splitting.
Yes, so they
Horrible
crack.
splitting.
So like some mangoes split, right? Like Namdok Mai, but Alum Porbanisham, or as I know it as Imam Passan, cracks. It develops fissures, which often will heal over, but sometimes they don't, and they get bugs in them, and then you throw them
Right,
away.
that's what happens, and the bugs
Yeah.
get in, and it's all over.
Yeah.
Beetles.
Some other real anthracnose prone ones. Tess pollock actually gets a lot of anthracnose, especially post-harvest. But if you took Tess pollock out to Loxahatchee land or to Okeechobee or something, my expectation would be that its flowers would get a lot of fungus too, and its small fruits. So that's a variety that's more appropriate probably for the coastal zone, as good as the mango as it is.
Yeah, the Tess pollock is most probably a Kerry turpentine
Yeah.
cross, and the dwarf Hawaiian is a Julie turpentine cross, and so it's like they're pretty related. But the Tess pollock, and they have some similar issues. But Tess pollock is much bigger mango, of course, than the dwarf Hawaiian, and not as early.
Another one that gets real bad, and it's an old variety that gets anthracnose real bad, and I learned it the hard way in Loxahatchee, is Dupuis Saigon. So Dupuis Saigon is one that we both grow.
Yeah.
Walter Zill grows it and really loves it, and I
love
like it.
I love the
Yeah,
I think
it's a nice
it's
one,
an
yeah.
excellent early season mango, but it is very prone to
the flowers,
anthracnose.
especially, because I hardly get any fruit.
Exactly. So you take Dupuis Saigon from the coastal zone out to the
Inland.
western inland areas, and all of a sudden you have a real hard time getting fruit from it because of the anthracnose on the flowers and the small fruits. In fact, my Dupuis Saigon never fruited in Loxahatchee, and I even sprayed it, and I couldn't get it to fruit. So that's a very dot fruits
Yep.
famously over here, and you
Yep.
take dot out west, and man, I was fortunate just to get a few of them a
I
year.
get a few
Just
every
a
year.
few.
Yeah, it's a great mango.
And it thrives out here. I mean, like, I could not spray the dot and it would still fruit. And the fruit are really pretty. With the little
red,
flowers.
yellow.
Let me ask you,
And
is there a
rather large.
list, and maybe all three of you can collaborate and put one together, but is there a list, like, if you're on on the coast or inland in Florida or even for California, what are mangoes like? What are the ideal mangoes to grow and the ones that are the least ideal? Is there like a list of the top 10 of each?
Well, there
I know
should be
it's
a
question
list.
you
When
always
you say
get.
ideal, if you're talking about disease resistance,
Just overall.
well,
I
because
know
that's such a variety of factors that have to be taken into consideration. And, you know, as you go further west, you just have to remember your options are shrinking. So, like, you know, you can't be as picky, perhaps. And, you know, you'll have to be more selective about what you grow. There is no comprehensive list as far as I know, but the University of Florida and Jonathan Crane and those guys are working on some kind of study that they're planning to do where they evaluate mangoes for anthracnose resistance and grade it. So like on a 1 through 5 type of scale, because it's easy for us to say something is only moderately prone or very prone or whatever, but how do you define that? How much crop are you actually sacrificing by trying to grow it in a humid situation versus if you grow it in a less humid one, or if you're spraying versus not spraying? That's so much to take into consideration when you throw in flavor, right? Because like certain varieties might be super resistant to a disease but not taste so great. I'll use the example of Florigon. Florigon fruits extremely well. Even in Loxahatchee, Florigon, I used to have like, I don't know, like 10 Florigon trees or something like that, and they would fruit very well, but it wasn't very high on the list of customer acceptance in terms of like eating quality. Now, it's not fibrous or anything, it's just not
For the
super
spoiled
complex.
palate like ours, like we know our mangoes, if somebody tries a Florigon is not really an experienced mango connoisseur like us, they're going to be blown away by
it's
Florigon.
disease resistant, reliable, productive, all sorts of good things. But when you compare it to other mangoes taste wise, it's just
It misses.
you know, it's
yeah.
I would never say no if it were the only mango on the table.
Yeah.
But you know, otherwise, one of the things that I've been hearing about that confused me is that there are a lot of Bangopali being planted near the lake.
Yes, I sold some of them.
Yeah, I mean, a ton. And it's like, it doesn't seem like the right environment for it.
Well, we're gonna find out, right? I don't have a lot of experience growing Bangopali, but until last couple of years, we planted a few, one of them at the farm in West Palm Beach. But you know, the property previously owned by Cecil Brumfield and now owned by Muriel Strasberg has a fruiting third of a tree or so. And that tree fruits every single year. But it's in a pretty good location. We don't know what it's going to do when we take it out west. And I've, you know, told people about that. And it's probably going to be one of those varieties where people are going to have to spray it a lot to get it to fruit in a more humid situation.
I know somebody who actually has a big tree.
A Bangopali?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and she gets fruit. I don't. We didn't discuss how much, but she doesn't spray, as far as I know.
I mean, again, this is one of those sample size issues where we don't know how some of these things are going to perform, especially when they're planted on scale versus planting one in a yard situation. Sometimes things are a lot different. Disease pressures are higher when you're growing more trees. The more mango trees you have around you, the higher your disease pressures are going to be because there's more inoculum in the air spreading around. So we talked about this with bacterial spot, right? Bacterial spot is actually more concentrated in the coastal zone because in part because there are more bigger, older mango trees around us.
Right.
And if we go even around here, there's mango trees in almost every yard around here, right? But the further west you go, that starts to diminish. So, you know...
That makes sense.
Yeah, so in an orchard setting where you've got thousands of trees in a limited amount of acreage, you're going to see more pathogen of whatever than you are, you know, in a yard setting.
Spectrum of pathogen.
So we'll find out with Bangopali, right?
Yeah, and it does also seem that you would have a higher concentration of problems if your whole area were the same variety.
Yes, I mean, like a monoculture, if you will, right? So, you know, if a variety is particularly prone to disease, then, you know, you're going to see more disease in general if your whole orchard is, or a big block of it is a specific variety. But the opposite is also true, right? If you're growing something that's very disease resistant, you might see less disease in general in your orchard if you're growing a lot of it versus less of the more fungal prone stuff. So, but a lot of information to be gleaned from these new plantings that are occurring in parts of Florida like Okeechobee, LaBelle, We do some consulting for a grower in Palmetto, over there on the west coast, north of Bradenton. And there's plenty of them now growing them in the Treasure Coast, like north of the Treasure Coast, like Fort Pierce and Fort St. Lucie out west. So these are areas that are new frontiers for mangoes. With our more mild climate now, we're able to grow them in parts of Florida that were previously off limits to them, at least commercially speaking. And we don't have a ton of information and sample size for many of these cultivars, and we're going to find out. But we need people to share information, and we need growers to talk to each other so that we can educate the public on how some of these things do, because otherwise it's a guessing game. So
yeah, well, Bangam-Pali is a really popular variety in India and very scarce here in South Florida. And just for nostalgic reasons, people from India just desperate to have a Bangam-Pali available down here.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been available for the longest time. It's pretty much unknown variety for mango growers.
Yeah.
But it could be, a bad match, nostalgia and
sometimes it is, like Bizcochuelo. Bizcochuelo has a strong nostalgic pull for folks from Cuba, from Santiago de Cuba.
Yeah.
Those people, that is their mango, and they'll plant it no matter what.
Yeah.
And even if you warn them, like even in West Palm Beach, if we don't spray that mango, it gets anthracnose. That's in a good area, and a lot of these people are not in good areas, and so they're going to plant these things, and if they don't do enough to control the disease, they're not going to see fruit.
I tried it. I tried Bizcochuelo in the Dominican Republic, and I thought it was average. I didn't think it was anything out of the world.
To me, it tastes like a washed out pickery.
But in Cuba, I guess because of the soil or whatever, or just because of or maybe the selection in Cuba is not that good compared to here. But my grandfather had a Hayden mango at his house in Cuba, in the central part of the country back in the 40s.
Yeah.
And there was a train that would pass by in front of his house, and people will stick their heads out of the train just to look at the red mango because they've never seen one before.
Right, yeah.
And they'll break their necks looking at that mango so the train would pass by.
Well, yeah, so that nostalgic pull is part of the draw with mangoes in a lot of sense, and so it's one of the best examples of that is the East Indian mango. So folks from and the Julie as well.
Yeah, and East Indian is horrible down here.
Yeah, it's very troublesome with disease in general. It gets a lot of bacterial spot too, and it gets powdery mildew. And so there was a time in my young career where I used to try to convince a Jamaican person to grow something other than East Indian or Julie, and then I quickly realized I was wasting my time.
I made a couple of Jamaicans go quiet with a suggestion like Timor instead of East Indian.
Well,
I call it Mama's meatloaf. It's like you do not want to taste the best meatloaf in the world. You want to taste what your mother made.
Yeah.
And so it's not, it's
so,
not, there's people that are certainly open to tasting other things, but there's nothing like those old flavors or memories.
And Jamaican people are very passionate about mangoes. I mean, amongst all the different ethnic groups around the world, I'm not sure that there's any group more passionate than they are.
And Indians too, they're very passionate.
Yeah, but I think, you know what, I feel like Jamaicans are even more passionate.
They're more religious.
Than people from India. I mean, some Indian folks are certainly very passionate about the mango, but it's almost like it's taken for granted in India in a way that it's not in Jamaica. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just BSing here, I guess, a little bit, maybe, I don't know, this has just been my experience, but it's tough because they're going to plant this tree, and there's a very good chance that they're not going to see much of any fruit from it, but you don't want to argue with them, and you can provide them with alternative information and everything, but in the end of the day, they want that tree, and they're going to plant it come hell or high water, so.
Yeah, at my farm, early on, I planted East Indian, and it did horribly. It was just full of
and you're in an excellent place to grow mangoes, and it still doesn't do well.
Yeah, but what I did was, years later, I put it on the other side of the property, does fine.
It's in a better location.
Yeah, it's just a location thing, and it's not that much different. It's just maybe, trees were blocking or a building was blocking the wind or something like that, because it's like night and day.
Yeah, we get pretty good results from it, but I spray the heck out of it. So that goes a long way, because when I haven't in the past, if I did get a crop from it, it was getting bacterial spot, and I was losing a lot of them, and they're hard to sell anyway because they get a lot of post-harvest anthracnose, even if they're fruiting well. East Indian, they'll look beautiful and you pick them,
Yeah,
and
and
they're
they'll
all
get black
spotted.
spots.
Oh, it's
They'll
horrible.
spots get bigger and bigger.
And so what we do with our East Indian fruit is we literally just reserve them in the house and take them out when we'll get some Jamaican customers, because they really appreciate that mango, and they don't care that it's spotted up the way an American customer might.
Yeah, they're used to it. I mean,
it happens that way in Jamaica too. Yeah.
Oh, really? It's that way in Jamaica?
It's that way in Jamaica,
Oh.
absolutely. So East Indian, even in Jamaica, gets spotted up, and it's still worth more money than the other mangoes in Jamaica. It sells for a premium price compared to the other stuff.
Yeah.
It's the most valuable mango that they've got down there, and which surprises some people here because they are turned off by the fiber. But it's a juice mango, and it's
very tasty.
It's a wonderful
it tastes
mango.
it kind of reminds me of Jakarta.
Yeah, it's in that flavor realm.
Right.
You know,
I think it's like a more powerful flavor than Jakarta. I like Jakarta a lot, but I mean, East Indian is like,
I agree.
Wow,
Yeah.
it's going to
More it has more of a sugar kick.
And actually, that's one of Gary Zill's favorite mangoes is the East Indian, because of that deep, rich complexity it has. And so when I don't even attempt now, Jamaican folks will strip them with their teeth. When I get an East Indian and I want to consume it, I never attempt to slice it or bite into it.
Yeah,
I just juice it like it's an orange, okay, into a glass or a cup, and it's just phenomenal flavor. And there's a few of these other Indian juice mangoes that are similar in that regard. There's another one that we grow called Panchadera Kalasa, which is a southern Indian juice mango. It's got a little bit of fiber, but not overwhelming, and it has a little bit of a similar flavor in that respect. So these South Indian juice mangoes, of which East Indian is most likely a descendant, perhaps of one called Charuku Risalu. There's also Peta Risalu and another one called Chinna Risalu. And these mangoes are a little fibrous, and they're grown in the southern part of India, in like Andhra Pradesh and Telangana and some of these states. And they're consumed as juice mangoes. That's kind of their whole purpose. And they would have brought some of those to Jamaica back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that's most likely where East Indian was derived from. So it was an Indian mango that got probably cross-pollinated with turpentine and some, because it's polyembryonic. East Indian is a polyembryonic mango. Yeah.
Another good juice mango, Asuka.
You know, I've got one. I got the budwood from you, actually.
Yeah.
And it's not a very large mango.
That was Colombian.
Yeah. In fact, I've been in Colombia and ate them at the markets there before, and they produce pretty abundantly there. I only have like a third of a tree, because it's got a couple other varieties. It's sharing it, and it doesn't have the best part of the tree, actually. The other hybrids that are on that stump have better spots, but I've gotten fruit from it. It's a little anthracnose prone.
Yeah, mine has fruit about this big on it, and it's already brown.
Yeah.
With anthracnose. Another good juice mango that's popular for being juiced is the mesk from from Egypt.
Yeah, I grow mesk, and some people don't like it, especially people that object to that Alfonso Indian flavor. They don't like. There's same people that don't like Kerry mango, that don't like Kesar. Usually, it's like about.
But it
half
has
of
that
Americans.
fragrance. Well, mesk in Arabic means fragrance.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they get that. I guess some people don't like that kind of.
So that fruits
taste.
Prolifically for us, and that's a mango that will fruit out west.
And resistant,
and
too.
it's anthracnose resistant, right? So, like, if you're looking for an Indian mango that has good anthracnose resistance, mesk is actually from Egypt, but it has an Indian flavor, and it's polyembryonic too, by the way. It's very vigorous, though. The smell is very floral, and people are gonna be repulsed when I say this. It smells a little like Raid,
yes, I love tasting Raid.
It does have a chemical flavor. It does have a chemical.
There you go.
It smells like bug spray or something.
Yeah, it's on the chemical-y side, but it's a pleasant chemical taste, though.
To me,
it's right up there.
Mesk tastes kind of similar to Kesar. It's not quite as rich and sweet as Kesar, but it's close. And so it might be a good alternative to people who might have some difficulty getting Kesar to fruit, or perhaps it grows too slowly for them in certain areas. It might be a good mango for California because of how aggressive it is. But I actually like mesk. It's just a little too small for a lot of people. When it really bears heavy, they come out like that size, and that's a turnoff for people, I find. When
Yeah, they're on the
buying.
small. I might get about this big.
They'll get like that for me when it's not as loaded up.
Right.
But anyway, that's an interesting variety that doesn't get talked about much. But if you love Indian mangoes, it might be worth growing. Indian flavored mangoes.
I just wanted to, go back just a little bit and mention to people watching that might not know that Kesar is the Indian word for saffron. And so it's
Probably the Gujarati.
Somebody told me it was not Indian today. They made a comment. It was from
Kesar?
somewhere else. Yeah,
No, Kesar is from Gujarat, India. That is their mango.
Yeah,
That in the Gujarat state, which is a state in central western India, they grow that on an enormous scale. Now they grow it a little bit in some of the other states like Maharashtra and places like that, but not anywhere near the way they do in Gujarat. That is their mango. They love that more than Alfonso in Gujarat.
Yeah, I mean, I like it more than Alfonso.
I do too, actually. I think Kesar is a wonderful mango, and it actually performs better here in South Florida than most Indian mangoes
Forget
do.
about Alfonso here in South Florida.
Yeah.
Well, ours fruits, we get fruit from our Alfonso tree, but the quality of the fruit can vary. Sometimes it's actually pretty good, and sometimes it tastes like mango death. And sometimes it gets spongy tissue, so we'll cut it open and it has some breakdown.
Yes,
And
what's up with that?
That's a calcium deficiency. What triggers that calcium deficiency can vary, and it's not always present. Some years it doesn't have that problem. Most years it hasn't, in fact. But we now grow a variety called Bennett Alfonso.
There you go.
And the Bennett was selected actually in India and brought to the United States around 1901 or 1902, I can't recall. But it was actually introduced first at the Hayden household. They planted the first Bennett Alfonso tree at Captain Hayden's property, and then they took budwood from that. But anyway, that mango was studied by the USDA back in the early 20th century, and they said it produced and performed better than the Alfonso. So anyway, it just disappeared from the nursery trade and from everything for decades. It stuck around in some of the collections, and then I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, I was down in the Redland, and I was actually at Trek, and I couldn't believe how much fruit were on these Alfonso trees. I could tell they were Alfonso just by looking at them.
It looks just like an Alfonso.
And then I looked at the tag, and I knew the name Bennett Alfonso from literature, but I was so impressed by how much fruit these were making. Especially out west, and they do spray at Trek and stuff, but like it was still impressive.
It would be a miracle for an Alfonso.
It would, to make that much fruit. So I took budwood and I grafted it to one of our trees in West Palm Beach. I top worked something.
Well, you got to be careful because there's a lot of seedlings. Bennett Alfonso seedlings.
Yes, but they have them
the
number.
They
numbered
them. Number after
No,
the
this
name.
was Bennett. This was absolutely Bennett. And I top worked the tree, and within 2 years that tree was fruiting, and it was fruiting well, and it tasted better than the regular Alfonso did. It had less issues with spongy tissue, and I was so impressed by it. We top worked another tree into it, and we started to graft it. And now we propagate it, and I'm really excited to see what the results other people get from the Bennett, because all the historical literature suggested that it performed better, and our own experience has shown that it performs better than Alfonso, and it tastes very good. It tastes more like Alfonso.
For Bennett Alfonso.
Yeah, Bennett Alfonso is something that
that's a winner.
We're going to hopefully get more information from some of these people that have planted trees in recent years, and we've distributed a lot of budwood of it as well. And then there's white Alfonso. Chris, you've been growing that longer than we have, so maybe.
Yeah, I just have a little branch. It's in a weird place because the neighbor has huge trees, and so it gets a lot of shade. But it definitely does better than
Alfonso.
Interesting. Okay.
So what a disappointment he is.
So, in wrapping this particular topic up, what's your closing comments about the topic? What was the topic? About the Anthracnose? Was that what we started off with?
Yeah, well,
I
the
think we hit
disease this
everything.
year. I mean, I think that the moral of the story is that you have to be expecting it to happen. Even if it doesn't happen every year, you have to expect anthracnose to be a problem and prepare for it like it will be an issue. And the way you prepare for that is either by having a disease control and prevention program, and that's a whole nother topic, or growing varieties that are naturally resistant to anthracnose. And for most backyard growers, that's the best ticket, is to make sure that some amount, some big chunk of what you are producing and growing in your yard has natural resistance to fungus, and especially anthracnose if you're further west, that you don't have to be so concerned about it every single year, and that you can still expect mangoes more years than not, even if you're not the type of person to spray, or even if you overcrowd your yard a little bit, which many people are prone to do here.
Well, of course, when you're talking about a backyard situation, definitely pay attention to how much you're watering things. Because if you have your sprinkler set to go off twice a day, you can sort of expect problems with your mangoes.
Yeah, and how much nitrogen are being applied to your trees. I mean, one of the most common issues I find with people growing mangoes in their yards is they apply way too much NPK for too long, or they grow them in yards that are receiving turf fertilizer. So you see some of these lush, beautiful lawns, and you know that they're getting turf fertilizer applied to them. And guess what? The mango tree absorbs that nitrogen too, and it keeps it in its trunk for up to 3 years. And that will encourage more anthracnose. Trees that are being fed more nitrogen will get more fungus.
And the fruit can be really bad too.
Yes. So
there's definitely many things to think about. And I know, Alex, you have a consultation service where you help people with their spraying situation. Chris or Julian, do you offer that at all?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure Julian does. What we do is basically direct people to a lot of free sources that are out there. Because for the average homeowner, a lot of times they don't realize that they're master gardeners and stuff that are, would be able to help them with a lot of common issues. So when you get into more complicated situations, or for groves and that kind of stuff, then you want to hire like a hotshot consultant, possibly Alex. But there, I know that Har also does consulting and such. There's a lot of people out there, but basically there's a lot of information on the internet, and there are also resources available, like at the extension service and such.
And I want to recommend people go to, I know you have a bunch of videos, Alex, all over the internet on this topic. Chris, I know in your channel you have a lot of videos with Har on this topic, good videos. And Julian, you said you offer a service to teach people how to...
I mean, that's all I do every day, is answer the phone, and people have a question about their avocado, mango, or whatever it is.
Oh, good, they can call you, man.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Well, on my website, there's a live chat on my website where you can just send me a message and I get it on my phone immediately. And I always try to keep up with that, because once, if you let something go, it turns into a dragon.
So good luck with all of your tropical fruit planting and harvesting. South Florida is a great place to grow tropical fruit, so I'm hoping that everyone who listens takes a step to add more trees to their yard or even to their patios.
Yeah, and by the way, on the topic of this season, this year, I still expect, despite the discussion that we've had, I still expect it to be a very good mango season this year, and I encourage you to take advantage of that as a person that's watching and perhaps interested in growing mangoes in your yard. Take an opportunity to try as many varieties as you can before you commit to planting something or grafting something. If you've got that opportunity, if you live down here in Florida, relish in the fact that you're able to have access to all this stuff and take advantage of it so that you can make informed choices on what you're growing, okay?
Yeah, try as many varieties as you can, and if you happen to fall out of love with a variety that you have, not the end of the world. You can learn how to top work your tree and get practically instant fruit of another variety.
Yeah, you can have an enormous root system pushing it.
What's better in terms of how quickly you can get planting a 25-gallon or top working one that's already there? What do you think is easier?
I top work 25 gallons all the time.
Well, he top works 25-gallon trees, right? In terms of planting versus top working an existing stump, top working an existing stump. It's going to outproduce the planted tree, whether it's a 25-gallon or another size tree, almost every time, and you're just going to get better results quicker in most cases versus planting a new tree. So
A lot of times